Inside a men's toilet at one of the Soviet Union's most sensitive military research institutes, Adolf Tolkachev locked the door and placed a classified document beneath a miniature camera. The room had a larger window than the toilet near his own office. That meant better light. It was also used less often, which gave him perhaps 20 minutes before his absence became difficult to explain. Outside, engineers were designing the radars and weapons that would guide the next generation of Soviet combat aircraft. Guards and security officers were there to ensure that those secrets never crossed the institute's gates. Tolkachev was one of the men trusted to protect them. He opened the file, steadied the camera, and exposed another frame. The device clicked. If the photograph blurred, the risk would produce nothing. If a colleague tried the door, the most valuable CIA operation in Moscow could end before Tolkachev ever left the building. For years, this quiet electronics engineer gave the United States detailed intelligence on Soviet radar, avionics, airborne missiles, and air defense systems. American military specialists said some of his reporting saved as much as 5 years of research and development. A later Air Force estimate valued the savings at roughly $2 billion. That is how Adolf Tolkachev became known as the billion-dollar spy. But the most remarkable part of his story is not how much his intelligence was worth. It is that the CIA nearly rejected him before the operation began, and that when his life was finally destroyed, the fatal weakness was not Soviet surveillance. It was betrayal from inside the CIA. Adolf Georgievich Tolkachev was born in 1927 in Aktyubinsk, in what is now Kazakhstan. His family moved to Moscow when he was 2. He trained in electronics and eventually became a senior designer at a military aviation institute associated with the Radar Bureau, later widely known as Phasotron. His access reached into the core of Soviet air power. The documents around him described aircraft radars, missile guidance systems, countermeasures, tests, and technologies that were not yet operational. To an American engineer, they could reveal not merely what Soviet weapons were designed to do, but where they might fail. Tolkachev did not look like a revolutionary. He had a respected position, a comparatively comfortable apartment, and the routine of a member of the Soviet technical elite. His wife, Natalia, was also an electronics engineer. Their son, Oleg, was interested in art and architecture. Beneath that ordinary life was a private history of state violence. Natalia's mother had been executed in 1938 during Stalin's purges. Her father was sent to a labor camp and died not long after returning to Moscow. Tolkachev later told his CIA handlers that what happened to his wife's parents was a central reason for his hatred of the Soviet regime. He was also influenced by dissident voices, including Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Andrei Sakharov. At first, he considered writing protest leaflets. Then he calculated what would happen. The state could seize the pages, arrest the author, and continue unchanged. He possessed something far more damaging than a slogan. He possessed access. In January 1977, Tolkachev approached a car with American diplomatic plates near a Moscow gas station. He asked whether the driver was American, placed a folded note inside the car, and walked away. The note requested a confidential meeting and proposed a method of contact. The CIA did not respond. Moscow was one of the hardest environments in the world for Western intelligence. The KGB watched diplomats followed vehicles, examined routines, and used false volunteers, dangles, to draw officers into traps. A Soviet citizen offering military secrets might be genuine. He might also be bait designed to expose an officer, compromise tradecraft, or provoke a diplomatic scandal. Tolkachev approached again, then again. He left more notes and included technical information to prove that he had real access. Each attempt increased his own danger. He was standing near American diplomatic vehicles, initiating contact with foreigners, and repeating behavior that Soviet counterintelligence was trained to notice. Yet CIA headquarters continued to hesitate. Gardner Gus Hathaway, chief of the Moscow station, argued that the volunteer might be worth the risk. Then, a Pentagon request arrived seeking intelligence on Soviet avionics and weapons, the precise subjects Tolkachev claimed he could provide. By early 1978, the wall of suspicion began to move. The CIA tested the contact through notes, signals, and cautious exchanges. On New Year's Day, 1979, a case officer finally met Tolkachev face to face. The Soviet engineer brought handwritten material, technical specifications, diagrams, and information that matched what American intelligence already knew while extending far beyond it. The apparent dangle had become an extraordinary source. Tolkachev explained that he was a dissident at heart. He had never visited the United States and did not pretend to be an American patriot. His objective was to damage a political system he despised. Money mattered, but partly as proof that the Americans understood the value of what he was giving them. He also understood the direction of the road he had chosen. There would be no safe way back. The CIA built a communications plan for a city saturated with surveillance. A particular window in Tolkachev's apartment could become a signal. Prearranged names used during telephone calls could direct him toward different dead drops. Packages could be hidden inside objects that looked like rubbish. Personal meetings required case officers to spend hours on surveillance detection routes, changing direction and studying reflections, traffic, and familiar vehicles. Sometimes, an officer would approach the final meeting point, notice one suspicious detail, and cancel the entire operation. The American officers risked expulsion and imprisonment. Tolkachev risked execution. In February 1979, the CIA passed him a matchbox-sized camera, instructions, and a light meter concealed inside a discarded mitten. The camera could take dozens of exposures, but it required more light than was usually available. Its small body was difficult to hold steady, and the mechanism clicked loudly enough to worry him. The early results were poor. Many frames were blurred or too dark to read. Tolkachev proposed a method that sounded less like spy fiction and more like household work. Give him an ordinary camera. He would check out classified documents, take them home during lunch while Natalia was at work and Oleg was at school, attach the camera to the back of a chair, and photograph the files in his apartment. The CIA supplied a Pentax ME 35mm camera and a clamp. The improvement was immediate. At 2 meetings in late 1979, Tolkachev delivered more than 150 rolls of clear film. Notes accompanying the photographs explained technical language and identified the significance of the documents. The volume became so great that CIA translators struggled with the backlog. Then his institute changed its security procedures. Employees checking out sensitive files had to leave their building passes at the library. Without his pass, Tolkachev could not carry documents home and get through the guarded exit. For a time, he returned to miniature cameras and photographed documents inside the institute. He chose a toilet because it gave him light, a lock, and a reason to be temporarily alone. Years later, under another period of tightened security, he described using a toilet in an adjacent building. He would create a reason to visit someone's office there, enter the less used room, and try to complete the photography within 20 to 25 minutes. On cloudy days, the light could be too weak. One unusable roll might contain information he could never safely obtain again. Still, he continued. He photographed documents on fighter radars, missile systems, countermeasures, tests, and proposed aircraft. Analysts could compare a radar's intended performance with its known limitations. Engineers could redirect American programs before spending years developing systems against the wrong threat. Electronic warfare planners could study where Soviet equipment might be jammed or deceived. One early assessment described the documentation as having value beyond calculation. Military specialists said it saved up to 5 years of research. A 1980 CIA memorandum concluded that even if the espionage were discovered, the information could remain valuable for at least 8 to 10 years, the time required for Moscow to design, test, and deploy replacements for compromised technology. Tolkachev did not single-handedly guarantee later American air superiority. Aircraft performance depends on training, doctrine, logistics, tactics, and many sources of intelligence. But he gave American planners a detailed view of systems that technical collection alone could not fully reveal. The CIA offered payments on a scale almost impossible for him to spend safely in Moscow. By 1980, his annual compensation was set at a level equivalent to the salary of the President of the United States, with much of the money held outside the Soviet Union for a possible future escape. His personal requests were often much smaller. Oleg liked Western rock music. Tolkachev asked for records, headphones, a cassette player, architectural books, drawing ink, pencils, and specialized pens. He requested medicine and once asked for Western razor blades. The man moving military secrets worth billions also worried about the ordinary frustrations of being a husband and father in Moscow. Natalia and Oleg knew nothing about his espionage. That secrecy isolated him, but it also protected them. If the KGB ever came, they could truthfully deny knowledge of what he had done. Tolkachev repeatedly asked the CIA for something it would not give him, a poison pill. He wrote that he did not want to endure an interrogation by the KGB. His case officers resisted the request, and the matter eventually reached the Director of Central Intelligence, who refused to authorize it. The agency discussed exfiltration plans, but Tolkachev remained in place. In April 1983, a security investigation erupted inside his institute over a possible leak. Tolkachev had recently passed information related to the subject under investigation. Convinced that arrest might be imminent, he drove to a dacha with his camera, communications equipment, instructions, books, and money. He burned everything that would burn, then discarded the charred metal pieces during the drive back to Moscow. He also reported that he had obtained a poison pill on his own. For days, when summoned to his supervisor's office, he placed it beneath his tongue in case the meeting was an arrest. The investigation passed without exposing him. He could have stopped. Instead, he concluded that he had overreacted, asked the CIA for new equipment, and returned to work. By 1984, his determination had become a security problem of its own. He wanted another Pentax and more opportunities to take files home. CIA headquarters refused. The intelligence was valuable, but allowing him to repeat the most productive method could also make his behavior easier to trace. Tolkachev continued with miniature cameras and handwritten notes. In January 1985, the operation still appeared normal. He returned used cameras, delivered intelligence, received new equipment, and reported no crisis at work. American officers detected no obvious change in KGB surveillance. But somewhere inside the American intelligence system, the secret was already moving toward Moscow. Edward Lee Howard had been trained for a CIA assignment in the Soviet Union and had learned about the Tolkachev case. After problems during a security reinvestigation, he was dismissed in 1983. Public accounts and later CIA histories strongly indicate that Howard contacted the KGB and compromised the operation. Exactly when he revealed Tolkachev remains uncertain. Soviet counterintelligence may have needed months to identify the engineer, verify the information, and build a case without warning the CIA. Then came a second betrayal. Aldrich Ames, a CIA counterintelligence officer, volunteered to spy for the Soviets in 1985. Later accounts indicate that Ames also gave Moscow Tolkachev's name. If Howard had opened the door, Ames ensured that it could never be closed. The CIA did not yet know that two Americans had placed its agent within reach of the KGB. In March 1985, an unusual window signal appeared at Tolkachev's apartment, but he failed to attend the meeting. CIA officers later wondered whether he had been trying to communicate distress. There was no proof. On June 5th, his normal readiness signal appeared again. Heavy surveillance forced the assigned officer to abort. On June 13th, the signal returned. This time, a CIA case officer reached the meeting area without detecting a tail. A woman nearby seemed to be speaking loudly on a radio taxi phone. Then, at the exact meeting time, more than a dozen KGB personnel in camouflage uniforms emerged from hiding. They seized the officer, forced him into a van, and took him to Lubyanka prison. The package intended for Tolkachev contained 5 concealed cameras, handwritten material, medicine, thousands of rubles, Western articles, 2 architectural books, and drawing pens for Oleg. KGB interrogators opened the items one by one while recording the scene. Tolkachev never appeared. The Soviet government later announced that he had been arrested in June. He was tried for high treason and sentenced to death. On September 24, 1986, Adolf Tolkachev was executed. The man was gone. His intelligence remained active. American specialists continued exploiting the enormous archive he had delivered until approximately 1990. His photographs and notes had outlived the operation, the equipment, and the agent himself. To the Soviet state, Tolkachev was a traitor who handed an adversary military secrets. To the CIA, he was one of the bravest and most productive agents it had ever run. Both descriptions begin with the same act and end with opposite judgments. Money was part of his motive. Revenge was part of it. So was political conviction. He wanted to injure the system that had destroyed Natalia's family, and he chose the weapon available to him, the trust placed in his own hands. But his story is also an indictment of the service that depended on him. The KGB did not defeat Tolkachev through superior surveillance alone. Men inside the CIA learned his secret, broke their oath, and sold enough information to close the trap. A camera in a toilet penetrated Soviet air defenses. A conversation with a traitor destroyed the man holding it. Was Adolf Tolkachev a dissident striking at a brutal regime, or an engineer who allowed hatred to justify betraying his country? And who carries the greater guilt for his death? The man who chose espionage, or the insiders who sold him? Tell us where you draw that line in the comments. Subscribe to the Modern Ledger Files and continue with our next Cold War case, because governments close their archives, but the ledger keeps the names.